Hello and welcome to another Podstalgia. This time we've got Dan Abnett with us, the prolific writer, absolute legend of a guy, and some of his work, well, it's not only sort of stuff that influences our toy buying, it influences our conscience. The guy is absolutely everywhere. And we've been reading Dan Abnett for as long as we can remember, probably those of us in our 40s, because he's been doing it a long time. So without further ado, let's turn to Dan Abnett. So Dan Abnett, legend, raconteur, dare I say?
We haven't started yet, so you don't know.
Well, that's true, actually. I mean, like, you've been a long-time customer of ours, and
I have.
you know, you've come in, you've got some magnificent toys. I know that, but we'll get onto that later. So I wanted to ask you about your past, about your history. What sort of where you're from? What sort of drives Dan Abnett on now? Because as a creative, as a writer, I mean, you're revered amongst many communities, mate. You are, as I would say, the dog's knees.
Just a little lower.
Yeah. Well, it's the impolite version, or the bee's knees. So I try and do it with both. You see, I'm not a sweary type, as you know.
No, that's fine.
I'm sort of like that. So where were you born, Dan?
I live in Kent now, which is where I was born and brought up. I'm not far away from home. I've been to other places in the meantime, but I circled back here about 20 years ago, and I now live in Maidstone, which is the county town, which is essentially where I went to school many years ago. So I've stayed. I've returned to my locality after a long time away.
Yeah, you say many years ago. You don't really appear to have aged for at least the last decade. I've known you.
I have a number of portraits in the attic that are looking the worse for wear. That's what it is.
It's normally the hair, isn't it? It's normally
that went years ago. So you get a free pass at that point, don't you?
Yeah, you get old and it doesn't disappear. It just drops.
No, it just slowly comes down there, and your head turns upside down. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, and you've got the full beard on, which
the
is
full beard. Yeah, I've had that for a while. Yeah,
very seasonal for those that do celebrate the pagan festival. Anyway, enough of that. So what was your childhood like? Mum, dad?
Yeah, I know. I had what I considered to be an extremely happy and lucky childhood. I was the only child of only children, so very small family, very small family. My parents, my mum's still around. My dad died a couple of years ago, but they were both teachers for a start, both art teachers, and both artists. So it was an incredibly arty house. My mum still, to her ability nowadays, paints and draws, but she's been doing that for her entire life. My dad was a painter, but he also he loved model making. So he built the most amazing model railways and the most extraordinary aircraft models and stuff like that. He just anything he could lay his hands on, and that led to his sideline career. So he taught for his entire career, but he was also they were part of the folk revival in the 1960s, and folk clubs and stuff like that. And they ran the local folk club. So it was all very hippie, very arty. And my dad was musical, but he wanted to play the banjo. Not an ambition many people have, but anyway, he wanted to play the banjo, and a banjo was a very expensive thing to buy. And he was a school teacher on a school teacher's salary, couldn't afford to buy. So he made himself a banjo. And it worked, and it was great. And the other people at the club that they ran used to come along and go, "Oh my God, that's brilliant. Can you make me one?" So through the 70s, 80s, right the way through, I suppose, into the early noughties, his sort of second career, which he was much more famous for, was as a luthier, as a maker of stringed instruments, guitars, bazookas, banjos, anything like that. He'd make them one at a time, custom build for customers all around the world. And he, particularly for the instruments he made for particularly the Irish folk tradition, the bouzouki, which what is now the Irish bouzouki, he sort of co-invented with Donald Lunny of Planxty when they wanted something that was louder than the standard. He is, bless him, he's gone now, but he was world famous for it. So in that environment, I grew up, just encouraged to be creative, which I was. I used to like to draw and write and read and all those sorts of things, and it was a very agreeable environment to do that in. It was, there wasn't like what you're doing with your nose in a book, that kind of stuff. So that I came out of that, and I feel extremely lucky for that, to grow up in an environment where being creative and artistic was not a weird thing. You know what I mean? And so a lot of the skills that I had or creative for myself then, reading, writing, being creative, and then allied to other things that when I was growing up, you're talking about the past, but things like playing role-playing games very early on, first edition Dungeons and Dragons back in the late 70s, discovering comics and drawing and writing my own comics because I love comics so much, and it allowed me to do the things that I enjoyed most at the same time, drawing and writing. And even toys, they were all outlets for the imagination. They were all things that essentially it was like a gymnasium for the imagination. So the skills that I learned being a dungeon master, playing role-playing games, or just the ideas that filled my head playing with toys, stuck with me, and I somehow managed to weaponize them into a professional skill set.
You've got quite good at that.
yeah. But I honestly think I mean, you could track it back to all sorts of things. Also, when I was a young kid, when I was about 3 years old, I was diagnosed with Perthes disease, which is a disease of the hip. And it meant that I had to, back then it was treated with calipers, those metal braces, leg braces. Yeah. It's 3 years old. I had a metal leg brace on my left leg and a stepped up shoe on my right. So I couldn't go out and play football and do all those things. So I literally was some kind of Dickensian child parody, sitting in my room all day, losing myself in my imagination, reading books. And I'd never complained. It wasn't a horrible thing to do. But basically, I grew up in that kind of environment. All the things that inspired me when I was there, and things I loved doing as a child, are the things that I've sort of refashioned into tools for doing the job that I do today. I think that's one of the reasons that I jump around between projects, that I'm prolific. For me, it's like a kind of slightly more serious, grown-up version of the way I played as a kid.
Yeah.
With autocorrect.
Yeah. It becomes the creative process. There are different types. I'm very much I flirt from one thing to another, and I'm a little bit haphazard. But if I wasn't haphazard, it's like a sportsman that gives in the odd hard tackle every now and then. If you take that out of his game, he's not the same player. I think that's how I am as a creative. It's sort of like I'm a little bit like, ooh, shiny, sort of like a pigeon on some sort of drug is kind of how I sort of operate. It's just everywhere. So
but I would agree with that to a certain extent, because I think you've got to be curious and inquisitive to be inspired. So although I sort of don't see myself quite that kind of oh look squirrel reaction, because I've got set deadlines, I'm on regular projects, there is I've got constraints that keep me, I've got to do these things by these dates. So that's the way my life works. Regular comics, delivering novels, working on a game, whatever it is, they're all regimented, and they're all very specific to the things that I do. But if I'm not alert to that shiny object thing going on, then it all runs dry really quickly. I'm always looking for inspiration, and you don't know what's going to spark it. It could be an article in the newspaper. It could be just something you see in the street. It could be anything from it, something you're reading, some weird little toy you find at a toy fair, whatever it is. And you go, oh, wait a minute. I don't know why, but that's just given me that thing, which either is perfect for the thing, happens to be perfect for the thing I'm working on and keeps it fresh, or it's just something that's going to go in one of my notebooks so that I can use it. Do you know what I mean? And it's a really weird process, because it's not a direct inspiration. It's not like I see a toy of a spaceman and then go and write about a spaceman. It's like you're saying about the shiny object. I see something, and it's not that thing that catches my interest, and it does something in my brain that comes up with something else. So seeing the squirrel in the tree makes me think of something else for some reason. And I don't know how those connections work, but that's how creativity works. So you need that. I don't think that's a weakness that you're describing. I don't think that's a lack of focus. I think that's the integral part of how it is to be an ongoing creative. You look for those things.
But I think what separates people like yourself that are really genuinely brilliant, and people like me that, for all my enthusiasm and love for everything, it's but you have that drive, that creativity, but it's measured, and it's such a way. And if you look back through your work, as I've had to do, to kind of
I love the word "had" in that. Thank you.
That wasn't meant.
No, I
know. But this is why nothing gets done when Dan comes to the shop. We just chat and rip each other. but your body of work's huge. You've done loads and loads of stuff, and
Yeah,
you're still hard at it.
absolutely. Yeah, I think that okay. So you got that raw creativity that I think a lot of people have, maybe most people have. I have somehow harnessed it, and I do think that one of the things that's happened over the last however many years it is I've been doing it, I've got very good at being disciplined about carrying on doing it, just doing it on a day-to-day basis. Like I said, almost an industrial version of that childhood enthusiasm. It helps that I love doing it so much, because I think that quite a lot of creatives, they get really sick and they need to change, I can't do it anymore, I need to take a few days off. I'm like, no, what's next? I'm loving this, I keep doing it. It's very seldom that I have a sort of blank day, but it does teeter into, dare I say it, some kind of I don't know, psychopathic behavior, where it's like, this is what I'm doing, leave me now. And so I've got this, if I wasn't being remunerated well and had publishers waiting, it would be aberrant behavior. Do you know what I mean? To be this obsessed with it. If I didn't have the excuse that actually people were paying me to do it, and then there were people waiting for this thing. And it's actually weirdly, what the one adjective that I get called more than anything else is prolific. Which is, is okay, except that prolific is used so prolifically to describe me, it's almost like an insult. Oh, it's the prolific Dan Abnett, as if to say, what's heavens, how are we going to shut him up? So I can't say anything for the quality, but boy, there's some quantity. Do you know what I mean?
I think your fans would say there's a lot of quality there, mate.
Well, I hope so. At least they do keep. I've got returning customers. Let's put it that way. So.
Yes, exactly. And it is a way, and it's a lovely thing, isn't it, to be able to have that excuse. I know I have that thing with when I'm talking to my wife and I'm looking at some toys or whatever. I'm working, but really, I'm just having fun. I'm not.
Well, find the job you love, and you'll never work another day in your life, as the saying goes. But I think that's it. It's not even an excuse. This is a serious professional job. It is what I do for a living. It's what I've done for a living for over 30 years. Non-stop. I've long past the point where I have to kind of go, I remember early on, friends and family used to say things like, I used to say things like, when are you going to get a proper job? Because you write comics. When are you going to, or once there was some success doing that, they'd say things like, when are you going to write a proper book? You write these books, but it's like, Space Marines and Shooty Death Kill and whatever. When are you going to write a proper book? And it's like long past the point where I even have to say, shut up. It's more a case of, look at this. That's what I do. That's what, that's why that's what I do on a regular basis. I do it seriously, published by loads of different people, companies. I have an accountant. I file my accounts it's a proper job. It's a business. Stop it. It's like, how much more serious can it be?
Great title for an autobiography, though. Shooty Death Kill.
Shooty Death Kill, yes. And that's actually technically what I refer to all Warhammer stuff that I write is Shooty Death Kill in space.
Yeah.
That's the full description.
Shooty Death Kill in space. That's brilliant. I love that. That's even better. You're better straight away. So going back, your mum and dad sound like people I would have loved straight away.
They are, yeah.
They're kind of people that would have, nurtured that environment. I had a happy childhood with my mum and dad. They weren't really arty, but my mum was. Sorry, my dad wasn't arty at all. He'd sit there reading the Daily Mail, tutting. My mum, on the other hand, was like an avant-garde sort of gardener in flowing skirts there was a pastel painter. There'd always be sort of easels up in the house with. And pastel painting takes so long. You're building layer upon layer upon layer. And it's only like after about 3 weeks, you go, oh, hold a minute. She was really good. And she started doing this thing on sandpaper and stuff like this. She was quite a hippie, my mum, bless her.
Yeah.
Both sadly now departed. But your sort of childhood sort of influences then, I want to ask you about that, because what was the first thing that really, because obviously being brought up in that household must have been like a melting pot.
Yeah.
What was the first thing that really made you go, oh, what was your excitement?
Goodness me. I think, and it's difficult to pin down exactly when it happened, but I think when I first discovered I was already a voracious reader. I would read everything. And bearing in mind quite a lot of children's literature, books for kids and that sort of stuff, are biased towards the fantastical and stuff like that. But I would read anything. But I think when I discovered things like fantasy and then science fiction and things like that, and I realized that there was kind of no limit to how you could deploy your imagination, that I got really excited. I remember discovering Doctor Who at about the age of 5, and around either just before or just after that, Star Trek, the original Star Trek, both of which were being obviously shown on British television at the time. And my mum and dad watched it. My mum was a particular fan of those, and I remember her telling me, because I started watching Doctor Who, for instance, around about when John Pertwee, the third Doctor, was on it, and I remember my mum telling me what had happened before about how the Doctor changed his face and all this kind of stuff. And so so that was great. And I would just go looking. We lived out in a Kentish village just outside Maidstone, and the mobile library would come round. I could go into town and go to the library, and I would just go in there, and I'd go to the science fiction section and just like borrow books and try people out, and so there was all those sorts of things. It was sort of just bits dropped into place where I suddenly realised how cool something was. I think I was about 8 or 9 years old. I changed schools, and I found myself in a new school, in a new class full of kids I didn't know, and I was one of the kids in my class who was like the best at art. I could draw really well, but there was one other kid who was also really good at it, and we became friends. And I was amazed at what he could do. It was so dynamic and so exciting, and we became friends, as I said. And he both showed me his inspiration, which was he was an avid reader of the British black and white reprints of Marvel comics back then, sort of, Mighty World of Marvel and things like that. Now, I knew what comics were and I liked them, but I'd never seen Marvel comics before. And not only did he sort of reveal these to me, he ended up giving me a stack of the ones that he didn't want, these tatty comics that he was finished with, which I took them home. I've probably still got them in a box somewhere because I read them and read them and read them. And that was another huge influence. A sort of chance encounter of like minds, where what he was doing, he sort of showed me where that sort of imagination was resting. And that was a really, really important moment. And I think my life's been full of those sorts of things where I think from a very early stage, I was always going to end up doing something like the thing that I'm doing. But it could have veered off at any point into different versions. I mean, it's similarly, like discovering comics at that Marvel comics at that particular point in my life. Later on, when I was at school in Maidstone, I went to school thinking I'm going to do art at A level. I'm going to art college. I'll probably be an art teacher because that's what my parents had done. It's like, I like art. That's what's going to happen. And I had a great English teacher who, about at the age of 15 or 16, when we were choosing options to go on into sixth form or whatever you're going to do, took me to one side and he said, I understand that you want to do art at A level. You absolutely should. You're great at it. You could do that. But he said, I just wanted you to say, just in case you hadn't realised it, he said, in the art set, you're one of 5 or 6 people who are really good and could go on to art college. In the English set, which you enjoy as a subject, you're streets ahead. You should consider doing English at university instead of art. He said, you don't have to, but if you want to, think about it. And if you want to, I will help you do that. And it had never occurred to me to study English, to go to university rather than art college, to study it as it were an academic subject. And I went, wow. And actually, thanks to his advice and then help, that's exactly what I did. So I sort of got this grounding in English literature and stuff like that, which was something I loved because I'd always been a reader, which I actually think also now informs what I'm doing, because it might be shooty death, kill in space and Marvel comics, but having an awareness of serious literature and stuff like that is something that I sort of draw upon all the time. Even if you can't detect the traces of it in what I'm doing, I'm thinking about that sort of thing. I'm sort of as I said, the adjective I get described as most of all is prolific, but the compliment I get paid most of all, which is again is a backhanded compliment, but I really love it, is somebody will read something I've done and they go, that was so much better than it needed to be. I go, that's fantastic. That's what I'm doing. Because it doesn't matter what I'm doing, doesn't matter what age group I'm writing for, what I'm doing, how minor or insignificant the job, it doesn't matter. I take it really seriously and I try and make it as good as I can make it. And I try and imagine myself as like the perfect reader of the thing I'm writing for, to what would please me. Yeah. So when somebody says something like that, I'm going, that's what I wanted. It wasn't just, I didn't just phone it in. I didn't just do the bare minimum. I really thought about what I could do with it and try to deliver that. And sometimes it doesn't work, but if that's the reaction I'm getting, I'm quite happy with that.
That's amazing. That's the second time, that phrase, that sort of like, it's so much better than it needed to be, has appeared a couple of times on this podcast.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
like you said, it's that attention to detail and that not being jaded after doing it for a long time.
No, absolutely not. It's still have that enthusiasm.
Yeah, enthusiasm.
I am amazed that after 347 million years that I'm still as enthusiastic about what I do as I am. I mean, I do it every day, and you'd think that there are days that are hard. There are days where I get bored and I think, oh, I've got to do something else for a change and just go off and whatever. But nevertheless, to come back to it with this fresh enthusiasm on a daily basis sort of startles me. And I think that better than it needed to be thing is something that is very particular to the sort of people maybe we are and the other people you've had on your podcast, is that when you have a deep love of and perhaps deep knowledge of, if you're a genuine fan or enthusiast of something, be it toys or be it movies or be it music or whatever it is, if you are then engaging with that thing in any kind of professional capacity, either writing about it or creating music yourself or whatever it is, I think you bring that knowledge. So it's almost like when I write something, I tend to write it for myself, imagining myself to be my ideal reader. What would that reader love this thing to do? But so in a way, I'm sort of writing for the kid, the reader that I was when I was like 7 or 8 years old. Yeah. What would please that person? And I think that's what that phrase means. It's like, it's not like just doing the job. It's having that extra, whatever percentage it is, where you can tell that the person who's done it really loves that thing, because the person who's reading it or watching it or whatever also loves that thing and able to detect that that extra little thing, the thing that didn't have to be there but is. And that to me is what makes, when I see it myself, when I watch a TV show or read a book or whatever, that really entertains me, and I'm going, that's what they did. They didn't just like it. Their love for it has come through in some sort of subtle way where you can see that they took the care and attention to add something that they didn't have to, but it's so good that it's there.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, that's ace. That is what a lovely. You know what? I've just looked at my questions, and you've covered about 4 of them. It's one of those things where I sort of like went, "Oh, you've just done that. And that leads me perfectly to that, and you've done it. That's how good you are at this." It's like, it's amazing. So from your childhood, from your sort of beginnings with your mum and dad at home, you then did uni.
Mm-hmm.
And when did you get your first sort of paid proper job, and how did that feel?
Well, it was great. And that was sort of accidental because, like I said, I ended up, to my astonishment, going to university. My English teacher, not only when I said, all right, I'm going to give it a go and try and do English at university, he said, I want you to take the Oxbridge exam. And I went, what? Again, nothing had never even crossed my mind to that. So I got a place at Oxford to read English. And I was there, and I took that very seriously. And I came out of that, and the only thing that had really changed in the course of my, highbrow academic career was that I'm going, all right, well, I'll be an English teacher instead of an art teacher. That's what I was going to do. Let me say at this point, there's nothing wrong with either of those things. What a great thing to aspire to be. But when it came to the end and we were all leaving, and my colleague, my friends in my year were going after these different jobs, and I thought, God, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And somebody had seen some of the cartoons I'd done for the college student paper, and they said, you should, and knew I would like these things, and they said, you should get a job in comics. And I went, is that something you could do? Because it never occurred to me that naively, but I've read all these comics my entire life, but it never occurred to me there was a sort of comics industry that existed where these people were producing these in any kind of professional capacity. So I ended up writing to Marvel's London division, and asking, just saying I'm interested in comics, and they invited me down to visit the office, and I went to visit them. They were in Bayswater at the time. This is the just past mid 80s, 86, 87. I went down to visit them, and about that time they were producing all the very incredibly popular newsstand tie-ins, like from Thomas the Tank Engine and Care Bears, right the way up through G.I. Joe, Transformers, Thundercats, all of that kind of stuff. And I went down there and I thought I was getting a cool day out. I was getting to visit the Marvel Studios. They'd show me around, they'd talk to me, and it would be fun, and that would be great. End of story. So I arrived there, and what I hadn't realised was that they had been advertising in the national press for editorial trainees, and they thought I was applying for a job. So I arrived and was one of a number of candidates waiting in reception for their interview. And I went, okay. So I went through with it. I had my interview and I got one of the editorial trainee places. So I joined Marvel at very junior level on staff. Worked in color separation and all those different very basic jobs. So a lot of this was pre-desktop publishing, or certainly was in the comics industry. And stayed there for quite a long time and loved it. It was an amazing place to work. My very great friends, and we just worked in this enthusiastic creative environment where we were all doing every job known to man. And we were all encouraged to try a bit of everything. Have a go at the colouring, have a go at lettering, have a go at all these different things, so that when we became editors, we would have some understanding about how those processes worked, because they actually, each one is in comics is its own little art form. So one of the things we were encouraged to do was to write some simple stories so we could understand what it felt like to write a story. And I remember just on spec, writing Action Force, G.I. Joe story. And I gave it to my boss. And I said, I've written this. And he looked at it and it came back a day later. It was covered in red lines and crossings out and changes and all this kind of stuff. And I went, oh, that wasn't very good. But he went, no, it's great. I've marked it up to show you what, little things you could do, but basically we'll buy it. So my very first sale was that.
That's amazing.
and we were all freelancing. So I started to freelance as a writer when my day job was an editor. And I carried on doing that for a while until I realized I loved the writing part so much. I eventually quit the day job and went freelance, and that's where I've been ever since as a writer. And I discovered that by kind of learning those very basic ropes as I went along. And I think when you're writing for licensed properties, I did a lot of stuff for Thundercats, Ghostbusters, the real Ghostbusters, Galaxy Rangers, bit of Transformers, bit of G.I. Joe, all those sorts of things. Obviously, you're writing to keep a licensing company very happy. So there are really strict rules that you've got to follow. You often get sent the style guide and the Bible that you've got to follow for that character. And I think that sounds restrictive. But the fun I had was, what's the most inventive thing I can do within these parameters? How can I fit the best story into the very tight guidelines? Sort of Peter Venkman would never do this. So you go, okay, all right, what am I going to do? And I think that was an incredibly good apprenticeship for them, being slightly more imaginative and working in bigger playgrounds, or even the playgrounds of my own invention where there were sort of no limits, because I understood that kind of assembly process of putting all the right bits together so that the basics were there that you could then expand on. You weren't going to destroy the original version of which is the important thing, because obviously you're working on Ghostbusters or Thundercats, you can't literally or metaphorically break the toys, because they've got to be used again and again and again, over and over and over. So I think that was really useful.
Retaining that character familiarity is something that I think is a skill in itself. I mean,
and not doing something so drastic with them that they could never go back to being what they were before.
Yeah, because you had those bios on G.I. Joe and on Transformers, even on the toys, it had the bio on the back. So you know their characters, and that would be transferred to the cartoons and the comics.
That was. You're probably aware that the G.I. Joe ones were all written by Larry Hama, who was the writer of the strip. And he did that because they had all these toys that they expected him to write a comic book, and he needed to get a handle on who they were as characters so he could write them. So he created all the bios, and they went, these bios are so good, and they ended up putting them on the toys, which is good. And to a much smaller degree, I was the anonymous writer of Spengler's Spirit Guide in the real Ghostbusters for 200 and something issues, where I invented utter rubbish on a regular basis. But that was part of the job, is kind of writing around and under and within the license that you're giving. So you're giving a little bit of extra to it without ever breaking it. And I think that's a great thing, a very cool thing to do. It's nice to be acknowledged. Things I've done like that in my career, where years later, despite the fact that I wrote them as work for hire for a license, that I discovered later that they are considered to be canonical. Where somebody's come to me and said, no, that we still. I wrote a Star Trek comic for Marvel in the 90s, Me and Ian Edgington wrote it. It was called Star Trek Early Voyages. It was about Captain Pike. And obviously now the big show on television is going back to Captain Pike, the original captain of the Enterprise. Yeah. And we discovered, almost by accident, that the Star Trek, the Roddenberry Foundation, considers our Early Voyages comic as canon, even though it was written on the fly for a license in the Marvel, and I think that's lovely. That's so pleasing to me that you can actually make a contribution to something that is gonna, was there before you got here and will outlast you and that kind of stuff, that you just added a little bit in.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So if I can play like a sort of little game with you now.
Sure.
Just to, I want you just to sum up these characters just in a few words. Just try and succinctly sum up these characters that you've obviously written about. And if there's any that you haven't, then I apologise. But sure. So I'm going to start. Let's start with Egon. Let's start with Spangler, Egon Spangler.
Yeah. A few words. Well, he's the brains of the outfit. He's eccentric and easily distracted. And what was lovely always about writing Egon was that he would come out with torrents of bizarre things that were both fascinating and weird. And that was obviously all based on the movie character. But that's why I liked him as a character so much. There is a sort of, I think, a Spock-like innocence to him too, as well, where he's so fascinated with the things that are happening, he kind of misses the real world that's going on around him.
He's quite childlike in that way.
Yeah, very sort of, yeah. But yeah, I always love writing that.
Okay, G.I. Joe then, Duke.
Duke. Well, Duke to me was one of the big ones. He was one of the major, significant, most embodying of heroism, and is the sort of exactly what made G.I. Joe, or Action Force as we called it. To my mind, the Action Force was more interesting, and it got into the sort of slightly quirkier specialists. You know what I mean? Is that there was an awful lot more interest. I think the very first story I wrote was about Footloose, the Scottish infantryman, battlefield trooper. He wasn't a big star. He was this guy over here doing his job, and the ones that had the specialist equipment because they were, I don't know, they were scuba divers or rock climbers, and that's it. So in many respects, Duke, God bless him, was very much one of the kind of, to me, vanilla characters that embodied the centerpiece of G.I. Joe, from which all the interesting variations could then develop. You needed him in order to understand why some obscure character could exist, because you needed those big characters in the middle. He was sort of the Kirk, or the, I don't know, the standard action man in the middle of the whatever.
That's kind of how I feel about it as a toy as well. I'm looking at the other guys. I'm like, sort of, not from a point of view of kind of just, but you're looking at the weird stuff. It's always
the weird stuff.
It's often not the main. It's in the margins where I'm in.
No, it's in the margins. I can't. You'll be able to tell me. There was the one that was was he called something like Haywire? But he was the sonics expert with the headphones and the little radar dishes, radar guns, and he could.
He had the silver. On the toy, like,
absolutely insane, and what a brilliant character, And I just went, I want to write stories about him, and they go, well, we need Flint and Duke on the cover, and I'm going, but there was that sort of thing, really appealing.
I was always interested with the obviously Larry Harmer had written the things, and they had to take some of the stuff out because he wrote one of the characters was paranoid schizophrenic.
That's right.
And they had to take that out really quite quickly.
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
So there's things like that which I always find interesting, and it's sort of, how did they get there? It's all that story. There's all these things you could kind of go off on. All right, I'll try one which is this is a bit of a setup. Rodimus Prime.
Wow. I will say I have written Transformers several times. When I was in that era of my career, I didn't write him very often because Simon Furman, who had the office across the hall from me, was Mr. Transformers. He was, and credit where credit's due for keeping the Transformers flame alive for such a long time. So with the Transformers characters, it was much more a case of them saying, God, we need a story this week because Simon's running behind on something, or he's got something else to do. Can you write it? And I would just go to Simon and say, what should I do? What would you have written? And he'd go, well, we could do this and this and this. I'd go, right, I'll just do that. And so I would always defer to Simon for those sorts of things. And as a result, I didn't create the same what might be described as emotional connection with the individual Transformer characters in the way that I did with Ghostbusters or Galaxy Rangers or whatever like that. But yeah, that's my excuse, and I'm sticking to it.
Sound. I mean, I'm the same. I don't know much of the toy lines that I've kind of, because I didn't grow up with the TV, so I didn't know but it's the toys that always attract me.
Yeah,
the toys, and then you get to know the character through the toy, and then there's things that surprise you in toys. You go, oh, really? That's what he was, but I didn't
didn't realize it at the time.
Think,
No, I agree with that completely. There's all sorts of different things that I didn't realize about all sorts of different things. And I think it's that goes right the way back to like being sort of 5 or 6 years old and being, out with your mum and dad, and they're doing the shopping on a Saturday, and you're left there standing looking through the window of the toy shop, and you don't know what you're looking at, but you're going, that's cool. And years later, you discover what that thing was.
Yeah.
You go, oh my God, okay. And that way,
No, that's what I love about toys. I'm still learning every day now. I'm still there. Going, oh, wow, that's that. Oh, that's cool. Why is that related to that? And these toy family trees are a weird thing. Like you've just said about just within the writing and within all of a sudden there's a family tree of who were, and then it just carries on. And toys are exactly the same. The people did different things, and I love all that.
Me too. And actually these days when I go to say a toy fair or something like that, we've got quite a good one here in Maidstone that happens every 3 or 4 months. There are certain things I look for because there are things that I collect and I'm interested in. But my favourite thing to find is the thing I wasn't looking for. When I have no idea what that was, what that is, but it's £4 and I'm buying it. And I will find out later what it was, and it's probably some knockoff action figure or something. But the point is, it's like that's just cool, and that's that shiny moment thing,
It's that margins as well.
We're
not buying. A lot of us aren't buying Star Wars. We aren't buying Transformers. We're not buying. Although I love all those lines, we're not buying. We're buying the weirder stuff. There's stuff in the margins. So it's good. What was your first toy memory?
My first toy memory, I think, has probably got to be die-cast toys, Matchbox and Dinky and Corgi, because that was my dad's era. My dad loved toys too, hence the model railway and everything, but he liked real world toys. He wasn't into the kind of fantasy stuff. But we'd buy Dinky toys and Corgi toys and stuff like that, and Matchbox, and love those. So I remember, in fact, weirdly, I found one at a toy fair a couple of weeks ago. There was a Matchbox one, mid to late 60s, which was a Land Rover truck that was a fire engine with a white ladder across the roof. It was a little, and that's one of the first things I can remember. And I actually found a pristine one in its box at a toy fair quite recently, and I just bought it. It wasn't even that expensive, but I bought it because I went, oh my God, I forgot that it's been so many years since I last thought of that thing, and there it is. And weirdly, when I bought it, and I was carefully looking at it, the transfers were still on the side, and it was Kent Fire Brigade. I had no idea that it had a local connection to me. I was going to say, that's Kent.
I think it's number 10 if memory serves, but
there you go. Yeah,
it came with regular wheels and super fast wheels, I think.
Regular wheels is the one.
I think you get it on super fast wheels, and that's quite. I think one of them's quite. I can't remember which one it is. There's a transitional version that's very expensive. And I think there is ones that aren't Kent. I think there's one that's London, but the Kent one is probably the more.
I wondered if they did regional ones, because they often did. They do 2 or 3 different regions so they could sell it around the country. But I was amazed because the one thing I'd forgotten about it particularly was that it was our local fire brigade. But anyway, it's those sorts of things I remember early on, and then I slowly, and I think I was an imaginative player as a kid too. That is to say, I wasn't the sort of kid who'd go, right, today I'm going to play. With Dinky toys or whatever, and tomorrow I'm going to play with whatever it was. There would be a sort of blurring, but I also had rules. So, for instance, I would never play with Matchbox toys and Dinky toys, different scales. Even 4-year-old, I knew that. But later on, particularly when I became interested in action figures, I would sort of build things for them and actually sort of custom build their costumes so that I could invent whole things that allow me to bring them all in together in all sorts of different ways. So I remember at one point I was building enormous when the Star Wars action figures first came out, and I had a few. I would kind of improvise the others from whatever else was around, and then I build kind of whole sets out of Lego. So I build a cantina out of Lego for them because, and I was being creative with them. And in my imagination, I couldn't see the join. You know what I mean? I couldn't go, oh, that's Lego and that's a rubber monster from a cracker and that's to me that was that's the alien and this is the cantina and here's Luke and and it was useless. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd never seen the film, so I didn't have that. So my childhood, I mean, there would be certain things like I knew that I wouldn't. If I was playing like with my toy cars on my car mat, I knew that my little Renault 5 that I had, you wouldn't get the tail out on that because it wasn't rear wheel drive.
There you go. Yeah, exactly.
It suffered terribly with understeer though, and there'd be different things. But then on other things, I would build these massive Lego like forts. And I'd have my Star Wars figures, my Action Force, all the other figures. Bear in mind, I'd not seen the films, not read the comics, so everything got mixed in together. But I wouldn't have ever had a He-Man figure because I didn't have those.
Yeah.
I didn't want those. I had no desire. I mean, now, cool, but I had no desire because it was just like, no, they're not going to fit with the other things I've got.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so I didn't play with my toy cars and my Star Wars figures.
No. You're sticking to the same rules. And also you learn about about playing because people play with things in different ways. This is a thing that I learned when I'm writing things like Warhammer, is that I quite often will like to sit in on a game, go down to my local games workshop or wherever there's a game going on and actually watch because everybody at the table is playing the same game, but they're playing it in different ways because they have different interests. So one guy's really keen on the rules, one guy's really keen on the kind of role play aspect of it, one guy's really keen on the dice rolls and the mechanics of the game, one guy's really interested in the tactics, but they're all playing the same game. They're just feeling that game in a different way. So when I was 3 or 4 years old and Dinky and Matchbox toys were my go-to play, I had my best friend also loved those sorts of things, same age as me, we were at school together, but he was particularly, it's going to sound stupid, he was particularly good at the car noises. And the sounds of them changing gear. And I learned so much about how cars worked from watching him play, because he didn't just push them around a map. He understood that they accelerate and decelerate, like you said, the understeer and all that kind of stuff, the noises they made. And that was a real revelation to me. And so I think not only do you discover things about the way your own imagination works when you play, even as an adult, but you do it, you learn about the world, but you also learn about the world from the way other people play with those things, how they see, how their imagination is acting on that thing. And that stayed with me for years and years and years.
See, my older brother was a lot older than me. My oldest brother, who was 24 years older than me, I think. Sadly, he's not with us anymore. He had a record player. Now, we had a record player at home, but he had a special record. And this record had car noises on it. So it'd be like racing cars of the 60s and early 70s. And I'd be listening to this, I think it was a BBC Sounds one, of these racing cars spinning around. So I'd hear this, and obviously you would hear it on the road. But because I didn't have a TV, it was like I had no other things, but I had this record. So I'd go around to his house, and that was the thing I'd put on when I went around to his house, was to put on this record and sit there and listen to these cars and imagine my playmat afterwards. So I'd get home, I'd race home, and I'd be wanting to play on my playmat with my cars. I was 28 years old. No, no. So that's kind of like how I sort of got this sort of fuel in that way. So it is your imagination that fuels it. So, but record players and music was a kind of a big thing for me. Music in general was something. Was that something you were inspired?
I think it was very much. Obviously there was a lot of music in my house because the folk music connection with my parents, and the fact that my dad was making these instruments, and the bands and the artists that were buying these instruments would come to collect them. They'd visit the house. He didn't have like some fancy workshop. He just made them in the garage, and people would come in and go, "I'd like to see your workshop." They go, "Well, all right then." So there was a lot of that music, and that obviously when you get to school and you start, particularly sort of secondary school, and there's the musical influence to the people around you, and you start to learn about stuff like that. So I listened. My taste in music, particularly as a kid, was so eclectic. It was everything from folk music to classical to God knows what. It was so weird, and I love that. So music is very inspiring to me, almost too inspiring, because my daily life, my work is to do with words. I can't listen to anything with lyrics when I'm working. I love listening to music when I'm working, But if there is somebody singing, it gets in the way. The words interfere. So I have a whole sort of types of music that I listen to, with soundtracks and ambient and all sorts of things like that, which I listen to when I'm working, so the words don't get in the way. And then there's all the stuff, and it could be going back years and years and years, that is the lyrical songs and stuff like that, which I listen to when I'm not working, listen to in the car, and listen to when I'm cooking or whatever, because it's so I've somehow managed to sort of polarize my musical tastes into some things that are work appropriate and things that just don't function in that way. So, but yeah, music always an inspiration, huge emotional, in a good way, emotional trigger. You can change your mood completely by listening to a particular piece of music or something.
Yeah, it's definitely. I've got somebody that I know, let's say that way, that struggles often with things, and the music is such a big thing for them. And I often say, go and put some music on.
Yeah.
Have a minute. Go and put some music on. Have a boogie. Have a dance.
Yeah.
Put yourself in a different position. But it is an enormous trigger, like memory-wise, everything like that. So what are the records of your youth? What was the thing that you remember sort of going backwards and forwards?
Well, like I said, a lot of folk music, a lot of classical music. I remember my mum had an LP. It was called The Golden Hour of the Planets, and it was Holst's Planet Suite.
Yeah.
And I loved that because it was the planet. So there was a fantasy element in it too, and I used to play that, and in the background when I was playing things. And then once I was a little older and like secondary school and stuff like that, I was very much, I'm sorry, a child of prog rock. So Genesis, Rush, that sort of thing. Listen to that very much. And in my school, there was a divide between those who were the proper, the Black Sabbath, Deep Purple, and then in the middle, Led Zeppelin, and then Genesis and Rush and that kind of band, which is where I think the art students, we tended to be at that end of things. Yes, I suppose Blue Oyster Cult, that kind of thing. And then very much into kind of American indie. So by the time I was at college, it was Talking Heads and stuff like that. It was. I sort of, my taste moved. There are certain things that I don't listen to, or over the years have not listened to. I was really loved, and then there's nothing I stopped loving. There's some things that I don't listen to very much, or I sort of stopped listening to because I'd moved on to something else. But I never look back and go, God, why did you like that? I went, no, I liked that then. That was great. Yeah. And now I like this, and that's entirely legit. I often feel when people seem to be embarrassed about the fact that they like Queen when they were 12 years old. I'm going, well, what's not to like? That's dark. Amazing. And besides, you were 12. Yeah. How amazing,
You develop, and it's like, I don't listen to Def Leppard anymore, but for a certain part of my life, I thought they were amazing.
Yeah, exactly.
In the same record collection, I was listening to the Smiths, and I was listening to all that stuff and Talking Heads. And if you're going to go about prog rock, remember my brothers are so much older than me. I'm the youngest one by 20 odd years. So yes, the reason why I picked up a bass guitar was Chris Squire.
Yeah, of course.
He inspired me to play bass. So Genesis, even when Phil started to sing, I was even when Phil started to sing and got off his drum kit, even then I stuck with it, and I enjoyed listening. But I was listening to them as a kid in the 80s, looking back. So I had to file through Barclay James Harvest and all the other,
the
Moody Blues that weren't the bits that weren't as good as some of the others. You had to go through that, and you knew that there was albums in there. There was gold. Why has he got this album? Wishbone Ash. When I learned that Wishbone Ash,
absolutely,
there's one of the guitars, and it's recorded in mono. So in one speaker you've got this flying V, and in the other speaker you've got the other guitar. And it's just amazing. It's just so cool. But it's not something I'd ever go back. And I mean, I occasionally listen to Yes and Genesis and stuff like that. But it's
do you find that sometimes you just get a real yearning to there's things I haven't listened to in 40 years, and I'll suddenly go, oh my God, I've got to go and find The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, or I've got to go and find my copy of ELO Time for some reason. Have I still got a copy of because something somewhere it's almost like you're lacking something from your diet, and you need that little bit of thing. So you might go years between listens, but it's still there as part of that landscape.
Yeah, and I think I listen to a lot of hip hop. I listen to I'm so wide range. And when you said Holst, the Planets, that was one of the records in my mum and dad's collection that I absolutely adored, because it's heavy metal on classical instruments.
Yes, it is.
It's just a rock. It's one of the greatest rock albums ever, and it's not rock. It's amazing.
No, it's brilliant.
And folk choirs as well. There was folk. Growing up in the sort of being a youth in the 90s, I was there was this whole sort of folk revival thing going on. And whereas there's some of it, I mean, the 80s wasn't a great period of folk sometimes, but the 70s was amazing.
70s was amazing. I mean, in the 60s, obviously, it was that folk revival. So you got the great British bands like Lindisfarne and stuff like that, which were bordering on prog rock anyway, and had strong connections to things like Led Zeppelin and everything. But by the 70s, when my dad was really making a lot of instruments, it was the Irish part of the folk revival where you had the Chieftains and the Bothy band. Planxty was the biggest band at the time, who my dad made instruments for. So I listened to an awful lot of that kind of stuff, which is fantastic. And then you say when it revives again, and you see those, if not directly folk, then at least folk traces of things where music's been influenced by that folk sound, which is usually just acoustic. Doesn't even have to be traditional songs, but has a certain sensibility. That runs right the way through that. And as a result of that, I like a lot of the American equivalent. And I'm not talking necessarily about country, although there's nothing wrong with country, but I'm talking about that kind of bluegrass, sort of indie folk American sound as well, which I really, really enjoy.
Yeah. This is the thing about music. It's a big sort of, and there are people with very strong opinions about it. My mate's Dan, who I love dearly. He's such a lovely man because he has no music snobbery.
Yeah,
I remember he would have he'd have Goodbye Mr. Mackenzie on his wall. Poster of Goodbye Mr. Mackenzie. I think it wasn't just Shirley Manson he was interested in. He had a poster of them, and then he'd have a poster of the Spice Girls.
Yeah.
He liked what they and I was just like, I mean, I wouldn't have done that because I was too much afraid of what people would say. But Dan didn't care, and he still doesn't now. I've just spoke to him today. He still is exactly the same, and he will go, "No, that's a good tune. I'll stand by that."
Yeah, no, I have to say I'd like to think that I'm a bit like that. If something's a good tune, and actually, I now look back on some of the music of my youth, some of the stuff in the '80s, which at the time I went, "Oh God, that's a bit whatever. What the hell's that?" And I look back and go, "Oh my God, what a tune that was! That was brilliant. Why didn't I like that more at the time?" And tastes change, but sometimes it's learning more about a piece of music. You like a piece of music, and then you realize why you like it because a member of that band used to be a member of the other band that you liked. It's the same connections in you making toys, where something's intrinsically appealing, and then you discover what it is about it that's appealing to you particularly because you make those family tree connections between things.
It's related to something else. It's related to something else. That's something that comes out on Toy Shop on Tour, actually, where I've just been to Italy and I picked up a toy and it had, even though it was a knockoff, it had so many things you were going, and that was stolen, that was stolen, that was stolen, that was stolen, that. And it's just so cool. It's so cool. So so with music then, is there obviously there's not going to be a favourite artist, is there? Because I mean, you're wide, like me, I couldn't pick one.
I would find it really difficult. I think the best I could do is to sort of pick a favourite artist from every sort of 5-year period of my life. Although I have to say, cliche though it is, Rush has a particular place in my heart as a band that just was they were kind of like Holst with electric instruments. You know what I mean? It's going back the other way. There was something symphonic about them.
Geddy was playing at the same time, singing.
And there was only 3 of them, and they made the sound of about 8 people, and every single one of them was an absolute virtuoso at what they did. And it's like, I always appreciated that about them. So they get a play every now and then. But it could be anything. Depends on the hour of the day. What I would pick as the tune for the moment.
Brilliant band musically, Rush. I just always felt, for me, because I grew up with Yes and with Genesis, it was kind of those 2 from that period would definitely stand out to me, because Genesis reinvented themselves into a pop band, and they go at it as well in the sort of in some of the darker years. I would say. It was quite bad, some of that, but they had a good go at it, and I quite like that. But then, like, now I'm listening to, there's a band called Do Nothing from Nottingham that are wonderful. I love them. I'm listening to a lot. At the moment, I'm going through a real 90s hip hop phase.
Okay.
Obviously, the only ones I can find on Spotify are I was trying to get the heavily edited ones, and sometimes the edits. Speaking out where they've dropped an F bomb and they've knocked it out and they've put like a little noise in or something. Some of those are hilarious. What was that? Because some of them are official as well. So it's quite fun when you got Snoop Dogg going over. So there's always joy to be had in everything you do, and I think music's one of the things. So hobbies. I'm going to ask you about hobbies and films as sort of the next 2 subjects. So. Hobbies, do you have time?
I make time now, because you can get so obsessed that it becomes dangerous. So I've always been interested. So hobbies, I would include wandering around toy fairs and toy shops and being interested in that. I sound stupid, but I read a lot to kind of clear my head of all the thoughts that's going on there. So I read non-genre. That is to say, I read a lot of fact stuff, a lot of historical stuff that takes me away from my busman's holiday of, so I'm not likely to sit down in the evening and read a science fiction novel. I cook. I'm an enthusiastic cook, and I'm a very enthusiastic photographer. That's one of my things. Both me and my wife, we just wander around with cameras and take photographs of stuff, and that started out work-wise because I used to carry a camera with me wherever I went to sort of make visual notes of stuff.
Yes, yeah.
And then I started going. And people would say, "Let's see your photographs." And I went, "Well, they're not for looking at; they are for their reference."
They're not for
and
looking
then I
at.
look back and I look back and I thought, actually, no, it's out of context. That's a good photograph, and I suddenly became interested in the idea of taking photographs. So a bit of that goes on, and whatever else interests me. And some of those things can be short term, and some of those can be long term. So I might get very interested in something for a little while and pursue that and be interested in it, or like I said, I mean, my genuinely huge enthusiasm for cooking comes out of the fact that I like food, and you got to eat every day. And so I thought, well, if I'm going to cook, my wife and I both cook, but it's like if I'm going to learn, I'm going to cook. I'm going to cook. Damn it! So sort of, and take great joy and enthusiasm from that.
What's your favourite dish? What's your favourite dish?
I am. Gosh, my all-time favorite dish it's the food equivalent of Russian. That's macaroni cheese. I just love macaroni cheese. But I'm a dab hand at knocking up a really good bowl of pasta with some interesting sauce. I mean, we're not talking about from a bottle. I'm talking about
from scratch.
From scratch, and that's something we eat for supper. But I'm interested in all sorts of things. And I find an interest in something breeds a greater interest in it. So you go further and further into those sorts of things.
Next time you come on, I'm going to take you for a mac and cheese at Jamie's.
There you go.
Store. Honestly, best mac and cheese I've had. It's
fantastic. You've got
unbelievable.
Me. Got me.
Chorizo mac and cheese, and honestly, it's kind of food you want to book a room with. It's like, this is good, man. Yes, that's good. So, any films? Are you a film guy?
I absolutely am. Yeah, film and television, another source of great inspiration and also engagement for me. So obviously, I'm a huge fan of genre movies and genre TV shows. I mean, Star Wars, Star Trek, what you name it, and going right the way back to the 70s, where I was a huge fan of things like the Tomorrow People and everything like that. But like what I choose to read, I like to read away from my day job. So I don't like to stay. Over the weekend we watched some really cool Australian true crime documentary series on Netflix, and then a documentary about the history of photography. No kidding there, because we both like photography. So all sorts of things like that, and classic movies. And I'm talking like 40s and 50s movies, old movies, weird movies. I've got for some reason, I have a very, very strong liking, particularly for Australian cinema, Australian and New Zealand cinema. I think they've created with a small industry out there on a very relatively modest budget. They've created some of the most interesting movies, going right the way back to the 60s and 70s. Obvious examples like Mad Max and stuff like that, but all sorts of really quirky things where they've used genuine. There's something quite quirky. I think there's so much about Australia that appears to be recognizable from our perspective, and yet it's not, and it's very weird. And so I love that Australian sense of the weird, which I think even in their thrillers and stuff like that has got a particular feel to it. So huge fan, and obviously huge fan of the genre. I mean, it would be remiss of me not to say I'm a huge fan of Ray Harryhausen's monster movies. I mean, of course, who of our generation in our kind of fields of profession would not be, but those sorts of things. So it's
absolutely. Everything with Ray Harryhausen, isn't it?
Absolutely,
it's the model making. It's the
absolutely
just everything. It's just
and
it's also gets you right in the feels. I always find one of those films because it's because it's nostalgic.
Oh yes, the nostalgia element, and by extension, there through to the other things of that sort of period. So it's some Hammer as a result. I mean, 1 million years BC. The Devil Rides Out, films like that, which I just I can go back to again and again and again and again and again, because that is that nostalgia element that's going on.
What did you think about? I only asked you one awkward question. What do you think about Guardians when that came out?
I was amazed and I loved it.
I loved it as well. And
I absolutely loved it. I was working on the comic at the time, and my editor said, "You never guess what the next Marvel movie is going to be because they just discovered." And I went, "What?" And they went, "It's Guardians." And I went, "Why? Why would they make a movie out of what we're doing now? Because it's very low on the pecking order in terms of Marvel properties that they could turn into a movie. And clearly they wanted to do cosmic. They whatever. They decided to do that. Maybe they wanted to see what they could do with something that wasn't well known outside of comics. And you know, I've always been a huge fan of Marvel Cosmic, which is why I wanted to write Guardians and sort of reinvent the thing. But once they were making it, I got to visit the set a couple of times, met James Gunn, who explicitly said it's your version. It's the version that you have reinvented with that tone that we're making the movie of. It's not any, you know, the respect to them. It's not the past iterations. It's that version with those characters. That was enormously exciting and extremely weird. And when it came out, went to the premiere and was blown away. I mean, I think it's an extremely entertaining movie. I know I would say that and I'm biased, but I think it's extremely entertaining.
I don't think you would. I think if you didn't like it, you'd say because you're you.
Yeah, no, I think I would. I absolutely would. If I didn't like it, I would. It's not that, but that's not me being the company man. I just really enjoyed it. I think they are. I think it'd be a terrible shame if all Marvel movies were like that, because that would be one note. But I think as a wonderful sort of contrast to a really gritty, great spy thriller like Winter Soldier, Guardians of the Galaxy, fantastic. And then the deftness with which they actually managed to weave those strands together through Infinity War and into Endgame, I'm going, that's a modern epic. You know, that's long form story. I had become a much bigger fan of television because you could get long form storytelling in a long TV series than a movie, because a movie was always going to be 2.5 hours. And I for all the pasting that Marvel gets for dominating the box office and dumbing everything down and all superhero movies, this and all that, to me, that great achievement of those first sort of 21 films up to Endgame was long form storytelling in movie form, and no one had quite done that. Not even the other sagas like Star Wars, not consistently in one block like that. And I think that's an amazing achievement.
I don't think that I wouldn't have. By the way, if I hadn't enjoyed it, I wouldn't have asked the question. So, and I'm not a film guy. No. But my son, when I said, "Look, I've got Dan," and he went, "Oh, Dad!" He was so excited, and I'm like, and for me, it's just Dan that I know. He's a lovely guy. But for other people, you know, it's how they think. And it's not just because of that. It's because of your body of work. So yeah, it's nice to be able to go through them things with you. And I know your time's precious. I know you've got lots to do, but I really appreciate you spending a bit of time looking back as well over that nostalgic past. What's next? Anything next on the agenda?
Oh, as ever, yeah. I've got here's my to-do list at the moment. It's like 47 different projects at once. I'm still writing loads of things for Warhammer. Just post-lockdown, I wrote the final novel in the Horus Heresy series, which is the thing that I started off nearly 20 years ago. Next year it'll be 20 years that we started it. It's like this huge novel sequence of their foundational myth, and I finally wrote this book that was literally so big they had to publish it in 3 volumes because they couldn't mechanically publish it. So we're in the middle of that coming out. The first 2 are now out, third one's out in February, and I'm now going on to try and free my brain up to write other things in that universe, and having got rid of this huge amount of continuity for that big thing. But yeah, and writing for 2000 AD, I'm still loving doing that. I'm working on some games, so yeah, I keep myself very nicely busy and happy, like I was 6.
Yeah. Just one last question, then I will ask you this: what's your thing you're most proud of? It doesn't have to be writing. It doesn't have to be professional. Anything.
God,
it's a big one.
That is a really big thing. I'm gonna have to say my daughters.
Yeah.
There.
Don't have to say any more than that.
Yeah.
Through all this and all your success, it's still that you come back to. And I knew you'd put in an answer like that. So, you know, Dan, you've been amazing. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me on. Thank you for asking me good questions, and thank you for tolerating me rambling away 10 to the dozen.
You know what? When you've got more time, we'll get you back on for another.
Oh, I'd love to. Please do. Please get me back. I'd love to. Yeah,
Speak to you soon. Thanks a lot. Dan Abnett, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.
So that's it. thanks very much for watching Podstalgia for this episode. We've been joined by Dan Abnett, and wasn't he amazing? What a great guy. And his enthusiasm. He's been doing it so long, but yet he's still so enthusiastic. It's lovely. It's lovely. And it's sort of given me that sort of nice feel as well to end the year with, because this is the last Podstalgia of the year. But we'll be back next year with lots of new guests. And remember, Toy Shop on Tour continues with a wonderful episode filmed in Italy, so you'll enjoy that, hopefully, and watch those two. So you've got one on Boxing Day and one on New Year's Day to come. So thanks very much. I've been Joe. This has been Podstalgia. We'll see you next time.